Welcome to the Kiwimana Buzz.
Hi everyone, this is episode 7 of the Kiwimana Buzz, and this is Michelle Taylor from Plant and Food Research Company talking about Varroa Sensitive Hygiene mites. I have to apologise about the end of this podcast. The quality is pretty bad. What happened, unfortunately, was their primary recorder failed, and we had to use our backup recorder, so I'll apologise about that. It's I just figured that the information was so important that we needed to just, show the whole thing. It's about the last 5 to 10 minutes that's a bit not very good quality, so I'm sorry about that. But I just figured it was important to get her message out there. So thanks to Michelle for doing the speech, and thanks to Daniel Paul at the NBA for letting us record this. So sit back and enjoy it. This is Michelle Taylor. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you today about the Varroa Sensitive Hygiene program, which has been running for quite a while. But before I start to do that, I think I need to give you a little bit of a background as to why we've been breeding these Varroa Sensitive Hygiene honeybees. And first of all, to be able to do that, we have to sort of back a little bit. When Varroa first arrived in the country in 2000, we had a research committee that was there. Can you hear? You can't hear? Okay. We had a research committee that we had put together, which was basically plant and food research. Back in the old days, it was called hort research. And then we also had a bunch of beekeepers from the National Beekeepers Association who were on the committee, and basically we looked at what was going to happen in the future, because that's what science is all about. Where are we now, and where do we need to be in 10 years' time to stay current and to be ahead of the game? So what we did is we looked all around the world to see how other countries were coping with Varroa. And the major thing that we noticed is that although they had these, not silver bullets, but these products that were working fairly well, resistance was starting to occur. So if you look up at these graphs up on the screen up here, you can see all those pink countries are countries that have Varroa. And the red countries, the red areas, are areas where resistance is starting to develop to these synthetic pyrethroids that we have. So you can see it starting to move through the country. So we're now starting to think, okay, well, the major issue that we're going to have, say, in 7 to 10 years is going to be a resistance issue. So what do we do to be able to cope with this resistance issue? And what we started to do was to put together a Varroa control toolbox. And in this toolbox, we have our synthetic products, which is our Apistan, our Bavrol, and our Apivar. And Paul's already talked about how we got those registered really quickly. And the other registrations were also for our organic products like formic acid, thymol, and oxalic acid. And we got those registered really quickly to enable you guys to be able to rotate your treatments quickly. We also knew, though, at that point in time that you wouldn't be rotating your treatments pretty quickly. You would use whatever was easiest, which is fine. However, we've been saying the same message for the last 10 years. If you do not rotate your treatments, you will end up with resistant bees. And that's what Mark talked about this morning. We're starting to see resistance in New Zealand. But you know what? Also in our Varroa control toolbox, we had other things that we started to look at, because we realised that chemicals aren't the only way to go in controlling Varroa. We had our biomycetides. So these are basically insects that we can use, or fungi that we can use to be able to control Varroa. There was ways that we could inhibit the chemical resistance developing in the Varroa. And then there was also the honeybee breeding programs that were all around the world. And part of the program that we decided to focus on at this point in time, knowing that it would take sort of 10 years to, 8 to 10 years to produce, was a honeybee breeding program. And that's where Varroa Sensitive Hygiene fits in. First of all, though, we needed to figure out, well, which program were we going to use? So again, looking all around the world, we found that there were really 8 characteristics of Varroa and honeybees that would actually enable the bees to be able to cope with the Varroa. And they kind of fell into 3 areas. The first being the honeybee characteristics. And within that honeybee characteristics, you've got things like hygienic behaviour. So the bees are really just cleaning out the colony and keeping it really clean. You also had characteristics such as the length of the cat brood stage. And we all know that it's the length of the cat brood that determines how quickly or how effectively the Varroa can reproduce. If the length of cat brood is longer, the offspring of those Varroa can actually develop properly, and then when the bee emerges, the adult Varroa emerge. So if we could reduce that down, that would be a way to go. The next measure was a measure of mite population, so the number of mites that were on, 100 cells of cat brood, or the number of mites that would be on, say, 1,000 adult bees. And then also, in terms of mite populations, well, how many would be inside the brood and the proportion of that. The third area with them was also the behaviour of the physiology of the Varroa. So basically, any damage that would occur to the Varroa, suppressed mite reproduction fell into this area. It's where somehow the mites were not reproducing. And so this was actually the most heritable of all the traits that we looked at. It was this one here, SMRD. Suppressed mite reproduction delayed. Americans, so they always put the delayed on the end for some reason, don't know why. But SMRD, and that's what we started to look for. And we then needed to say, okay, well, are we looking just for a trait, the SMRD trait, or are we actually looking for an entire bee? Now, Paul's just explained to you the funding issues. We have, with Sustainable Farming Fund, the program, this Varroa Sensitive Hygiene program, needed industry to be involved. If industry wasn't involved, there would be no point in producing it, because at the end of the day, when we produce a VSH queen, nobody's going to take it up. Industry needed to be involved right from the start so that they would be able to then take on this program. And that's where we're actually at now. But before we get there, I'm going to explain a little bit more. So we understood that we needed industry to be involved, and the best way to do that, we didn't have $500 to $1 million back then of industry input, so we worked with Sustainable Farming Fund. And that meant that you guys as beekeepers put in huge amounts of your money, you put in huge amounts of your time, so in-kind stuff that you did. You looked after beehives for us, you took our queens, you did all sorts of stuff for us, which was amazing, and it's been fantastic. But because of that 2 to 3 year funding, that meant that we were reduced basically to selecting just a single trait, because the single trait would only take probably 8 to 10 years rather than selecting an entire bee, which some of these programs have been running for maybe 50 to 80 years long. We certainly didn't have funding to do all of that, and I wasn't going to be around that long either, so we had to call it pretty short, 8 years. It's all good. So we then decided, well, can we just import some bees? And well, we kind of keep bees differently in New Zealand. This is beekeeping, us beekeeping in Hamilton in summer, so summer. So we had to make sure that when we imported, if we brought in this VSH trait, what would happen? What would come in with those traits? And it was pretty obvious that there's a lot of bee diseases and things that we do not have in New Zealand that they had overseas. So importing this stock was not an option for us. And there is not an import health standard to enable us to do that now. It's under question at the moment. And so we weren't able to bring in any stock with us because we weren't prepared to bring in Africanized bees, and we weren't prepared to bring in European foul brood, and we weren't prepared to bring in a whole bunch of other diseases that they have overseas. Fortunately though, what that means is that we get stock from all around the country. So we have your bees from the South Island and the North Island all together in one big melting pot, and trying to see if we can find this trait. So the first step that we needed to take was because we only had 2 to 3 years funding each time, so what we did is we broke it down. We had the final goal of being able to produce a VSH queen, but we needed to be able to show within 2 to 3 years something that we had achieved within that time. So the first step that we chose was to do a survey of the Varroa Sensitive Hygiene trait within New Zealand, and then see whether we actually had the trait in New Zealand. And on the left-hand side here, you can see that it's a normal cell with an adult Varroa down the bottom there, with an egg underneath here, and then you've got a male just above her, and then those other ones there are emerging females, so they're developing females. So probably the average is 1.7, but that's all good. So probably about 2 of those will be old enough, when the bee comes out, they'll be old enough to be able to then go and reproduce within the colony. On the right-hand side, what we see here is an adult female, and she only has 1 egg. There's nothing else in the colony. She hasn't reproduced at all. So what we were looking at is this particular trait here. The cell on the right-hand side, we're looking to see the proportion of mites that are in the cells that are not reproducing versus those proportion that are reproducing. And what that looks like when you open up a colony is you bring out these frames, and you sometimes see, you probably also, I don't know if you've seen it or not, but you'll sometimes see lines of open cells. And often you sort of think, oh, I must have just brushed it last time I was in here, or some of the beekeepers brushed it when they went past with a hive tool or something. But what it actually is it's the bees that have opened up the cells, and the Varroa have actually emerged. When we started off with SMRD, we didn't know the mechanism behind what was going on. But since then, over the last sort of 5 to 8 years, we've determined that it's actually the bees. The bees actually know which cells have reproducing Varroa. Crazy, hey? They know which ones are in there, where they are, and they often clump. So that's why you've got 4 here in an area that's pretty close together, the Varroa that are reproducing in there. And so what they do is they leave the non-reproducing ones, they don't bother about them, they open up these ones that are reproducing, the mites run out, and it stops their reproduction. So rather than them being able to produce 2 adult Varroa to go on reproducing, it stops them in their tracks, and then they have to restart again. So what we're left with is these cells that have only a male or an egg, and also the infertile ones. So it's the measure of the infertility, basically. So how do we do these assessments? Well, this is the kicker of it, really. This is the thing that takes the most amount of time. You have to get out a frame of bees, a frame of cat brood. The cat brood has to be purple-eyed stage, and you start to open up single cells with a microscope, because you don't want to see any of them. You don't want to lose any of the mites that run out the top when you open it up. And you have to take out their individual pupae, look in the bottom there, see if an adult female is in a cell, she'll always defecate on the side. So there'll always be a little white mark in there. You'll look for that little white mark, and then you'll look to see if there is a adult female in there, and how much offspring is in there with her. So we do that, but if there's 2 in there, you can't count that cell. So you need to keep on going. So you might be opening maybe 400 or 500 cells just to find 20 to be able to do your analysis on. And so what we found in this first year is we had 0 to 19% VSH, which means that 19% of the Varroa are not reproducing, and the other 81 are reproducing. So the next step in our program was to say, well, can we increase this trait in our bees that we have here in New Zealand? We've got 65 queens from all around the country. We've got beekeepers to supply their most varied genetic stock that they had, because every beekeeper has slightly different genes, and their bees are the best, So we got them to give them their best ones with their most different genes that they could possibly have, and we analysed all of those queens. We bred those queens up in colonies, and then we assessed each of those frames. We then started to take from those best ones that we had, anything that had over 10 VSH, we realised, well, that's, we've got VSH, Varroa Sensitive Hygiene, in those queens, so we'll start reproducing from them. And what we did is we have to use artificial insemination to do this. And this really does all come back to funding again, because we're looking at a single trait. We have to be able to identify the trait quickly. And our queens are a wee bit naughty. They go off and they mate with about 18 different drones. So if you are allowing her to do so, then her stock that she's reproducing is going to be very varied. So what we need to do is keep her within a known population, and we have to use artificial insemination to do that. So our queens that we have in our cells are have excluders on the front. They can't get out. She's just hanging out in there and producing her own bees. And that's actually what VSH is. It's the actual bees identifying those cells. So therefore, what that means is she has to, when she goes into a new colony, she has to replace the majority of those bees in there. And that's what takes the time. So that can take up to sort of 6 to 8 weeks for her to be able to reproduce enough bees that her bees in there are the majority of the population, and those are the ones that are going to be doing the VSH trait knowing where the Varroa Sensitive Hygiene, where the bees or the Varroa is, opening those cells up and letting them out. So here on the left-hand side, you can see a drone here. He's got a little bit of that semen sitting up on top there. It's the tan-coloured stuff, and on top of the mucus, and then the semen's on top. And we take it off with a really tiny, tiny needle, and we place it into the queen on the right-hand side. So she's knocked out with CO2, and basically it's all done within about 2 minutes. So it's a pretty quick process, but a pretty delicate process, as you can imagine. I pulled off quite a few stingers in those first couple of years. I think I lost probably 20 in the first day. So yeah, it wasn't very good. But those are parts of the process of learning how to run a new system and get it all sorted out. So in terms of VSH levels, what we found is that in the first year, we had 19. The second year, we were able to increase that to 36% of the mites not reproducing. Year 2, we got up to 65%. And year 3 was up to 80% of the mites not reproducing. So then the next question, and then right up to year 7, back up to 85% again. But that's all very well and good. Yep, we can increase the VSH levels. But the next step that we needed to do is to actually see what it looks like in the field. However, before we got to that point, we had to start producing our own mites, because what was happening was we didn't have enough mites to run our assessments. Our frames would come out, and we maybe only got 5 mites out of the entire frame of capped brood. And so obviously it was working, but we needed to then figure out, we needed to start producing mites, put them into the colonies for the assessments, and then the big question was, well, what does it look like in the field? And so we tried to see if we could run a closed mating population out on Great Mercury Island. So we had amazing support from Michael Fay out on the island there, and he enabled us to use his island free of charge, and we would take the bees out on a boat and bring them back on a boat. Pretty amazing island, actually. It's pretty isolated, but pretty beautiful. And so we took our bees out there to see if we could just put the bees out there and that they would reproduce. We put virgins out, they'd mate out there by themselves and have a closed mating population. Thought that sounded a pretty good idea. And we also wanted to see how long that they would survive without an assessment. So actually what happens in the field without a treatment. So if I didn't put in my Varroa control products, what's going to happen to these bees? So it's basically a live and let die. So we took out 50 colonies, and that was in December. And by May, we had treated all of them but 2. So that was a pretty big shock. We were not expecting that at all. I was on maternity leave, actually, but I had expected all of them to survive. Or maybe 5 not, but I had expected a lot of them to survive. And the fact of the matter is that 48 of them needed to be treated. So well, why? Why were 2 of them okay and the other 48 not? There was a few questions that we needed to then ask. Well, was it because when we took in the colonies at the start, they had excess Varroa at the start of the trial, so we hadn't enabled the bees to build up properly, so the Varroa overtook them, because the exponential growth of Varroa is it goes really slowly in spring, and at that point in time the bees are rapidly increasing, so you've got much faster growth of bees in spring than you do have of the Varroa in spring. So maybe it was because we started them with a high level of Varroa, and so the bees just could never catch up, so they were going to die because they just couldn't catch up. Or the next question was there just too much genetic variation? Were there other drone sources on the island? There shouldn't have been, because it was far enough away from the mainland. Or were there other colonies on the island? Or was it really just that the queens, they were too varied, even though we were doing artificial insemination and back crossing? Maybe there was just not enough genetic variation. There's too much genetic variation in there. So what we did is we then produced a whole bunch of virgin queens, and we took them out to the island and tried to mate them out on the island, but none of them mated because there was no drone sources out there. So that got rid of that first question. Well, maybe there was just there was other sources from around the country. The excess Varroa, we looked at those colonies that we took back from the mainland, the 48 colonies that needed treatment. We took them back to the mainland. We treated them all, and then in spring we let them increase after their treatment, let the Varroa increase to see if they were able to control the Varroa with them, at a much better rate. But no, they were not. They were not able to control the Varroa. The genetic variation was obviously too high. So then it was back to the drawing board again. So we're up to year 5 now, back to the drawing board again. And we have, bad weather, just as you guys do. We might have a spring where none of our queens take, or they all supersede just because the weather's shocking and we're feeding sugar syrup right through till Christmas Day. All those sorts of issues that go along with beekeeping was also the same issues that we found in this program. So the next question, as we started to build up our populations again, back in the mainland here, back at Mercury, just down the road here, is, well, how can we increase the assessment? Our assessment at the current time takes 8 weeks. 8 weeks in a beekeeper's life in spring is huge. It's almost a quarter of your season, really. So to be taking 8 weeks to do an assessment, it really is too long. So is there a faster way to be able to identify this VSH trait? So what we looked at was we developed a method to be able to cut the tip of the wing off the queen, because once she's mated, she doesn't need that anymore. And you just cut the tip off the wing, and then we do a genetic analysis on that wingtip. So it's kind of like you guys have your own fingerprints. Well, the bees have their own genetic fingerprints too. And these particular VSH queens have a fingerprint that is different to other queens. And a really bad picture, but on the right-hand side there, you can see 2 arrows. And you can see that there is there's 2 lines there down the middle. Over here. 2 lines down here. You can see a band that's really strong here in both of them, and then a band that's a little bit strong, but there's nothing in this one here. And which much better analysis in the lab, where you can see that, what it suggested is that there is actually a genetic allele that we can use to identify this VSH trait. We then ran out of funding again, so that just sat on the side there, and it's sitting on the side there. So that's probably one of the next things that we'll be starting to look at. Well, Rainbow Honey will be starting to look at, I guess, once they start this VSH program going. That they'll start to look to see how they can increase or speed up that assessment process. If they can do that, then the program will run much smoother and will take far less time and effort to be able to get out VSH queens. So that's just sitting there at the moment. The next step that we needed to be taken was, well, how do you get it out to industry? How does industry become aware of it? And although we'd been writing things for the National Beekeepers Association in the journal, and also presenting at conferences and field days and all those sorts of things, there's still a large proportion of beekeepers that really don't get any of that for some reason, and so have not known about it. So we set up some industry workshops, and we got over Sue Kobe from America. She's an amazing artificial insemination guru in terms of honeybees. So she came over and she ran these workshops on closed mating populations and artificial insemination. She ran 2 of them, and we had 16 beekeepers that came along to those, and of them, none of them were really prepared to be able to take up the program. So that was a bit disappointing. However, there's, we're not going to stay down, we're going to carry on. So the next step is really let's just compare them then with our commercial bees, because we want to know whether the VSH queens that we have, and how good are they? We're only looking for a particular trait, which is the Varroa Sensitive Hygiene. But what about the package that they're in? What about the package of this trait? How is this trait packaged? What is it going to look like? If it goes out to industry, what will it look like? Will the package still collect honey? Will the package still, have good healthy brood? Will the package still be able to have a good temperament? How's it going to be able to control the Varroa? So we wanted to put them out with our commercial bees and compare them with those. So we had 6 commercial beekeepers put up their hands. So thanks to all of you guys, probably, or most of you are here. Thanks for doing that. It was fantastic. So what we did is we bred VSH queens on Great Mercury Island. So these are VSH queens that were mated with VSH drones out on the island naturally. And we sent each of those 6 beekeepers 6 of those queens. And this was in May, because it was very late in the season now, and we were almost at the point of closing down the program because there wasn't enough industry input. And so we were just about to close it down, but then people put up their hands, so that was fantastic. And we gave them 6 of those VSH queens. We then also had produced what we'd call VSH, half VSH queens. So these are VSH queens that have been mated with just random drones from around the Hamilton region, so just slightly mongrel. And so, yeah, so we'll just call them half VSH queens, it's much nicer. And so we gave them 6 of those as well. And the idea was that they would then compare those with 5 of their own queens. So 5 of their own best queens that they would have and compare them. And so we would look at honey production, temperament, Varroa levels. We would assess the VSH on them and basically see what we'd get. And so these are the results from these. Honey. Now, I'm going to step down here because it's a bit hard to be able to read these. And so I'll need to point out to you. So you can see it's honey. Each box is a beekeeper. So this is beekeeper A, B, C, D, E, F. Beekeeper A, B, C, D, E, F. And in each of those boxes, we have 3 groups. Our VSH group, our half VSH group, and our beekeeper group. And you can read them up there. And each of those circles is an individual colony. And what you can see here is that there's really no significant difference between honey collection, between those colonies that survived through to February, than the actual beekeeper colonies. What the difference was actually site or location or management of the, here we go, no significant differences. It was really more to do with the beekeeper and the way that the beekeeper managed the colonies or the location of the colonies that they had. In terms of temperament, again, no significant difference. You've always got these little rogue ones down here. You read this the same way. Temperament we determined by the beekeeper saying, okay, 1 is nasty, totally stingy, will not go near the colony without an armoured suit on, up to 5, where you can work them with just nice, gentle bees, just the way that you would normally work them. And so, again, no significant difference. There was a couple of half VSH queens there, half VSH queens that were a little bit bad, but again, same with the beekeeper ones, they're also bad. So that was the temperament. February brood health. Well, what about the colonies that actually survived through? Now, all of the beekeeper colonies, I'd like you to know, all of the beekeeper colonies were treated with a synthetic product in October, November. So they all had treatment. So as we move on and we start to look at brood health now, what we've done is removed the colonies that died, because obviously you can't compare brood health. So we're just looking at the package right now. We want to see how effective the package is and whether there is any significant difference. And again, the same thing with the brood health. Now, I'm expecting the brood health ones are those colonies that have been treated, the beekeeper colonies that have been treated, I would expect those to have 5. 5 being best and 1 being totally diseased, we should be burning. Because we have parasitic mite syndrome or whatever else. Now, if you look up here, again, the same thing in our beekeeper ones. We've got ones that are around about 2 and oh, those ones are great. Those ones are fantastic in A up the top there. But there's still, there we go, some dodgy ones in here, which I was not expecting. I was expecting to see all of the beekeeper colonies to be perfectly healthy, at least a 4, if not a 5. So that was surprising to me. We then looked to say, okay, well, what about, just quickly. This is a frame of capped brood from a colony with a VSH queen in there. So what that tells you is that it should look exactly the same as a normal healthy colony. There should not be any dipped cells. There shouldn't be major spotting. There's a little bit of spotting going on, but it shouldn't look diseased. It should still look healthy. It should look, you should be able to pick it up and it should be, yep, it's healthy. I'm happy with the way that colony looks. The only difference being is those ones up the top there where they've been chewed, up the top there, because that's where the bees have identified the reproducing varroa. And then the tricky things, those bees, they'll actually then go in and recap that. So those bees will carry on developing within the cell by themselves, or they might just leave them open like that and the bees will just develop properly. Really tricky, very cute. Then the next one, we looked at February varroa levels. Again, the same thing. I'm expecting all of my ones that I've treated with a synthetic product in in October, November, to have pretty low levels of Varroa, maybe 20 max. But what we're finding is we have ones over here, there it is, over here, up to 100, up to 45, 50, 50. So we've got colonies that have been, where are we, over here, 100, 50s, 50s. So we're still getting these colonies that are your beekeeper colonies that are not, that are equal to the VSH colonies. There's no worse, D is the only one here where our VSH queens and our half VSH queens are not looking as good as the beekeeper queens. And that might be to do with resistance, that this beekeeper D has no resistance in that area. That was actually from Taranaki, those bees. All of the others are from Hamilton down to Tokoroa, over to Rotorua, down to Hawke's Bay. So that sort of area down there. So that might be totally to do with resistance. So if we flick back to what Mark was talking about with resistance, we need to be aware that the resistance is, our colonies are going to be starting to look really unhealthy because our synthetic treatments aren't working. So what that means is now that if we've got our VSH queens in our colonies, and we can put that in with an organic product, or we can put that VSH queen in with another product, at the end of the day, our bees are going to be healthier. We still have issues. The VSH queen was never ever to be standalone.
Because it was a trait that we're looking for, and the idea is to put it into your bees. But what it does give us is the potential to have healthy brood in February over the time when we're actually doing these treatments. If we look overseas, these beekeepers over there, they're treating maybe 2 or 3 times before summer even. And then they've got another 2 or 3 in autumn that they're doing. So they're continuously treating. Some of them have a sort of an eight treatment cycles going on throughout the year. We're lucky we've still only got 2 at the moment. But I think what we're trying to say to you guys is that we can start bringing in alternatives. We think back to our toolbox and we have our alternative products that we've got in here, and we put them all together in an integrated pest management program. I think that we'll start to be able to develop a way to manage our bees effectively, unlike what's happened overseas where they've only had the ability to do 1 or 2 use 1 or 2 products or 1 or 2 management programs or something. So there you go. So we've got bees, mites that are actually, this one here is interesting. If you look in colony A, we've got ones here that have got, maybe 18 bees, 18 mites per 300 bees. These ones here are even lower, they're down at 0%. So these ones have got no mites per 300 bees. The 300 bee assessments were conducted just using the sugar syrup, icing sugar in a jar with 300 bees, shake it upside down, just like a pepper shaker, tip them out, see how many you go, count them up, put in some more icing sugar, shake them around, throw them out, see what you've got. So we're starting to see that the program is not there yet, but it's something that you don't want to lose because a lot of effort has gone into it already, and as resistance develops, this is one of the areas that will play a part in you being able to control the Varroa that's in your colonies. The next little area that we wanted to compare was the VSH percentage. So we did all the VSH assessments on all of the colonies that we got. A little bit of a messy graph going on. But if you look at the one on the left-hand side, that's the Varroa Sensitive Hygiene percentage. And we've got 0% VSH down here and 100% up here. Bearing in mind that the program had been in limbo for a year. Thanks, Daniel. Been in limbo for a year, so we've got our colonies here that are sort of below 50%, but as we know, we can increase that pretty quickly once we've got it in a population. And what we're seeing here is these lines here, they tell us that for every 10% increase in VSH that you have 6 less mites per 300 bees. So over the whole colony, that's actually quite a large number of mites that you're reproducing. For every increase in 10% VSH, you'll have got 6% less, and that's significantly different. The half VSH ones have the same sort of slope, but they have more mites per 300 bees. So the mites is up on the left-hand side there. So the next step was to commercialise the VSH trait, and the only way to do that is industry support. And as I talked about right at the start, this was always going to be the sticking point. Can we get industry involved? Are they going to be interested enough? Are they going to be aware of the resistance enough to actually be able to take it on and do anything with it? 2 years ago, you were not interested at all. A year ago, 2 of you guys put up your hands and said, yep, actually we'll take some of that stock and we'll try and see what we can do with it. And I'm imagining in 3 years' time, all of you would have said, "Done, I wish I'd done it." So no, we're not saying it's a silver bullet, because it's not, but what we're saying is it's part of the program. So we need to be able to increase the genetic diversity in our bee that we have, and the only way to do that is by actually putting the trait into your own bees and then developing it within your own bees. By assessing and maintaining and increasing the VSH percentage, because obviously that goes up and down depending on how much selection pressure in terms of the number of Varroa that are actually around. We need to be able to produce queens with consistent VSH levels, because unfortunately at this point in time, you might have one queen and you produce 50 queens, 50 daughters from her, but only 25 of those will have a high level of VSH and the other 25 will have a lower level of VSH. They'll still have VSH, just a lower level. So we need to try and identify how we can best figure that out, and that will probably be doing the developing that genetic VSH assessment. So that's the whole program in a nutshell. That's where we've been, and this is where we're going now, is commercialising the VSH trait. It's up to you. I hand the baby over to you guys, and if you have any questions, I'll be at the panel, but I don't know if we have any time now, do we, Daniel?
We've got a couple of minutes, 5 minutes until lunch.
Great. Don't want to hold you from lunch. But yeah, so I'll be here at the panel, so you can ask me any questions if you can.
There's one gentleman just stand in.
Hey, how are you?
Is there any process for the drones that
It's any process for the drones?
selection of the drones?
Right. The drone is amazing. It is basically a replica of the queen mother. So the idea being, in terms of commercialising a VSH trait, is for you to be able to, the best way for you to do it is to get a queen and then produce a whole bunch of drones from her and saturate an area with these drones. And then start reproducing queens from the VSH line that can mate with those drones in the area. And that's probably the best way to do it naturally, fastest way to do it. But the drones are a really important source, and that's why we slimmed it right down to just using a single drone or 2 drones in our artificial insemination, because we wanted to slimline it down to a particular population, a particular trait, and identify that, and then once we've found that, then develop it back up again. So that's rare. So drones are really important.
Neil?
Yeah, Michelle, does a screen pollen board have an effect on the length of time that the brood hatches? Is it cool the hive down sufficiently to mean that it takes a little longer for
Yeah, I haven't seen any evidence of that, but it would stand to reason that with a screen bottom board, it will be cooler in the bottom there. But it depends on how you've got your brood positioned. If you've got it positioned up high enough that the bees are all around about it and surrounding it, then it's not going to cool down the brood nest. When I was in the States years ago, we had these temperature probes in there, 80 of these temperature probes in and around the brood nest. And those bees kept that brood nest at 34.5 degrees, plus or minus 0.2. They were far better than any, do I dare say, daikon, or any other, system that can maintain heat. So yeah, it was very impressive. Yeah. So probably the brood nest, no, probably not too much.
Question? Just on the group.
What is the life cycle of mites? Is it months, years?
So the life cycle of a mite, we say it normally lasts for sort of 2.5 cycles. So a cycle being 14 days. Yeah, but they can probably last for up to 5, maybe 6 or 7. But yeah, we sort of work on about 2.5 to 3.5 cycles. Yeah. Cycle being from the time it goes in at 8.5 days, it goes in, then half a day later the cell is kept over, then it stays in that cell the entire length of time that it's kept over, then it will go out, wander around for 2 to 3, 4 days maybe, and then go and jump back in a cell and reproduce again. So that's the cycle. So we say a 14-day cycle.
Right. What about, did you try to just, I don't know, just to put these in completely fresh, no, just cells, like just to have frames so that these will just still cracks and will start again. Like just if you have some swarms and just they will come to new hive and just like they'll start with just like will it break the cycle of the mites?
No, because the mites live on the adults as well. So those 4 days that they're not in the cell, they're feeding. It's a parasite, size of a side plate on your leg. It's a really big parasite. So this thing is just living on the outside of the honeybee and will stay on there for 4 days. So by taking away the brood and putting it onto fresh cell, you can't break that cycle. The only advantage of doing that is by actually removing the viruses that are in your colonies. So there is advantage of having frame replacement, which I'm really glad that you brought up, because some of you guys beekeepers, your cells are pretty little now because they've got quite a few layers in there. But also those layers contain viruses and all sorts of other diseases in there. So you want to be replacing those on a regular basis. Any other questions?
And wild hives.
Yeah.
Have you ever looked for hives that exist in the wild for genetic reproduction? And
yeah. The question was if we looked in the wild for feral colonies. When we actually started some of this work, we put a advertisement in the newspaper to see what feral colonies were around, to see if we could see anything. And we got quite a few of these feral colonies. We got Mark did one and he got over 80. We did a second one and we got about 30 of these feral colonies that we looked at. But what we noticed is that all of them died within that year. So the feral colonies that you see around now are annual colonies. They'll go back, a swarm will go to a place that it used to have a colony in because it can smell the wax, it can smell the honey. Wax is highly attractant. Honey is highly attractant, so that they'll find that again the next year. So we haven't managed to identify any feral colonies that actually are Varroa resistant yet, but I do have probably 3 or 4 calls a year to let me know about these colonies. Yeah.
Michelle, when you melt our wax, when you melt the wax off old frames.
Sorry, where are you? Oh, there you are.
when you melt the wax off old frames,
yeah,
and say rewaxing new frames, is there any evidence that there's kill off in viruses in that old wax when you melt it?
I'd imagine it would depend on the temperature that you do it. I mean, the temperature that you've got in there. But I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that. But I'm imagining that the temperature would kill a lot of those viruses. Yes, so that 23 months, the colony was about to fall over. So it hadn't had a treatment for 23 months. The other colony that hadn't had a treatment for 16 months had made it through, it was fine, and then at 16 months decided it was going to fall over. If I do that with my colonies now, I treat it with a particular product in when was it, November, and by December it was dead because it had too many Varroa in it. So, although 16 months doesn't sound a long time, it actually, in the scale of things, it is. And I think that's one of the things that we need to be looking at. At the moment, we're used to our colonies in the spring, coming into spring with a really low level of Varroa. But that's only because we can rely on our synthetic products in autumn to do a really good job. As that stops, we're then going to end up moving into an area where we come into spring with a really high level of Varroa. And what that means is we need to then figure out, well, does that mean that our control products that we're using and our organic products that we may be using, or our AP bars or anything else, are they actually going to be able to control the Varroa well enough for us to make it through to summer again? So that is the next step that we need to be thinking of. Our increased population that we're coming into in spring, at what level are we going to start to have an issue with our Varroa treatments in spring because of our autumn treatments not being successful?
Ladies and gentlemen, lunch has been served, so we'll have to leave it there. Michelle, thank you very much.